Today we'll be reading The Hiccupotamus by Zenz. There was a hippopotamus who hiccuped quite a lot of miss, and every time he got a miss, he'd fall upon his bottomus.
Welcome to Living from the Soul. This is your host, Sam Terode, and today I'm happy to be speaking with children's book author and illustrator Zenz. Aaron and I were roommates in college many years ago. We collaborated on the humor page of the school newspaper. Probably the high point of my college career was working with Aaron to create a silent movie. It was in homage to Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, titled At the Ball. It's available on YouTube today. Aaron has gone on to write and illustrate 9 of his own books aimed at children, and he's illustrated many more books by different authors. His best-known book is titled The Hiccopotamus, and it's recently become a massive bestseller on Amazon with over 5,000 customer ratings and reviews. Some of his other titles include Chuckling Ducklings, Monsters Go Night-Night, Little Iffy Learns to Fly, and Porcupine Valentine. Together with his own children, he created a popular book review blog called Bookie Woogie, and he's been a 3-time finalist in the Grand Rapids Art Prize competition. Aaron has a passion for getting children excited about drawing and creating their own works. Whether you're an aspiring children's author yourself, or work with children in some other way, or just like hearing stories of authors and their struggles on the road to success, I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Aaron Zenz. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Sam. How are you?
Great. It's been a long time, even since we spoke by Zoom, I think about a year ago.
I know, yeah. It was close to when the pandemic was going on. Everybody was stuck at home, and I thought that was one of the fun things, one of the silver lining kinds of things to come out of that was I had all these Zoom meetings with people like from childhood, from elementary school, because all of a sudden people were like, hey, we can do this now. So wouldn't have done that otherwise if it hadn't been for people stuck in their homes.
Right. And then everyone burned out on that pretty quick.
Right. Yep. That's why it was about a year ago.
And then it took me a year to have the idea of starting a podcast and interviewing people.
Yeah. So, and I've listened to the first few you've done, and I've enjoyed them. So you got a good thing going there.
Thanks. It's mainly something to give me a social outlet.
Nice.
I've been working alone as a writer and whatnot for so long. I haven't worked with other people, and I thought, what is something I can do that can get me involved with interacting with other people? And the podcast was the answer that came back.
That is a great answer. So yeah, the creative life can be a very solitary experience, and plus, with a podcast you can choose the people that you're connecting with, and other creatives and people that just get you excited about what you're doing, and neat way to reach out to people too. So
is most of your work still you alone in a room drawing, or?
It is. That is the majority of what I do. So, yep. And for most of, well, maybe not most anymore, about the first half of my working life, I worked from home. So it wasn't really alone. There was lots of other people around.
Because you have 6 kids, I should tell people.
6 kids and a wife, and then also during that time we were homeschooling at the same time too. So it was like everybody home all the time, small house. And then maybe about 8 years ago now, I got some studio space outside the house.
Wow. Do you share that with anyone else, or is it your own private studio?
The spot that I have is my own. There's other people, there's another guy that owns the building, and I kind of have a room that's tucked in on the back side. Although when I found it, the majority of the building, the other half of it, was home to a jazzercise studio, and the walls are paper thin. So 3 times a day, I would hear jazzercise going on, for like a good hour, hour and a half sessions, just on the other side of the door, which was kind of amusing at first. And lots of, people shouting, like, "You go, girl," and "Work it," and stuff like that. So,
well, you could get up and stretch, get some exercise in while you're drawing.
I could, yeah, I could have done that. And at the beginning, I thought, "Oh man, how am I ever going to be able to concentrate with this?" And then it became just sort of, like background noise that I didn't even notice. And then when they moved out and the other guy bought the building, I really missed it. It was like too quiet, and I didn't realize I was going to miss hearing the lovely sounds of jazzercise.
Well, I wanted to go over the whole history of the Hiccopotamus. I was thinking it's kind of the dark backstory, perhaps, like how Chuck E. Cheese has a dark backstory.
Chuck E. Cheese has a dark backstory.
You haven't heard?
I'd rather hear that story than my story.
Well, his full name is apparently Charles Entertainment Cheese, and he was an orphan who doesn't know what day his birthday is. So he then has a compulsion to celebrate his birthday every day of the year.
Oh, that's so sad. That's so sad. I have a bad story with Chuck E. Cheese from my childhood. One of my most one of my most traumatic experiences. We were at Chuck E. Cheese, and the one we had, there's the stage that has like all the animatronic guys playing music, and at this particular one, underneath the stage was kind of like this labyrinth, this little cheese maze underneath that you could kind of wind through. And one day, when we were there, Chuck E. Cheese was in there. Like the guy in the costume was down underneath the stage in a corner, and there was just like a mob of kids all around him. And obviously he's not saying anything, but he's waving at him and stuff. And I was old enough that I didn't believe he was the real Chuck E. Cheese or anything. I knew it was a guy in the suit, and there was kids climbing all over him. And so I was just curious, and I was like, I wonder how he sees out of his eyes. Like, I wonder what that material is. So I reached up to just like touch the eye to see what it was made out of, and he immediately like slapped my hand like super hard, and I was taken aback, and it was like I could feel like this warmness on the top of my hand for an hour, and I like jumped back and I slunk behind a corner of the cheese maze and was just like peeking out, looking at this evil rat that had slapped me, and I was scarred by that for years.
I wonder if any of that went into your becoming a children's entertainer of sorts.
I don't know. I can tell you I've never slapped any kids though, so I learned from the negative example that you're gracious to all little people.
Well, I was thinking the backstory of the Hiccopotamus is not that dark, but more the long history that people wouldn't realize has gone into it.
Yeah.
One of my favorite phrases is that it takes a decade to make an overnight sensation.
Yeah.
That's definitely true with your book.
And it's the funny thing is I feel more like I'm an observer. Like I don't know how much of this very interesting story actually has anything to do with me other than showing up and initiating the whole thing. But yeah, so the Hiccopotamus was my first book. I've worked on, let's see, I just sent in the final art for my 40th book.
Wow.
Last week. Out of those 49 of them are ones that I wrote and illustrated. The other ones, I did the pictures and other people wrote them.
Wait, how many is that you've written and illustrated both?
So I've written and illustrated 9.
9.
So 9 of those I've done double duty there. And then the rest other people have authored and I've done the illustrations for.
That's a lot of books.
And I'm already contracted to do 5 more. So the total number of books that have my name attached to it is 45. But that was the first one. So the very first one was the Hiccopotamus.
And it started in our dorm room.
It did. Yeah. Do you remember me working on it?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't remember the actual creation of it. I remember, the fact that I did it and what class it was for. So yeah, we were in college. And at that point in time, I didn't have any real aspirations to be a writer, I don't think. I was taking art classes mostly just because, I enjoyed art. I loved art. I think, I was always more practically minded, thinking like, oh, art jobs are in marketing or advertisement or, things like that. Although my great love was illustration. I loved illustration art and CYF. But anyway, so I was taking a class about children's books, and it wasn't from the art department or the English department. I think it was for teachers. It was an education class, and it was actually more like how to use children's books in the classroom as a teacher. But they also kind of went through the history of the children's book and what makes a good children's book, and touched on those things. And I was enjoying it. And toward the end of the class, the professor said, "Okay, we've studied children's books all semester. Let's just for kind of for funsies, everybody in the class take a shot at writing a children's book." And I didn't really have any ideas, but I had this single like short poem, a single verse that I'd written down in one of my sketchbooks. Which was the first verse of the Hiccopotamus. So during a college break, I had been at home and I had the hiccups, and I was in the kitchen and my mom was there and I had the hiccups, and the word Hiccopotamus just came into my head. And I was actually trying to make a joke or a pun. Like I was trying to work backwards and say, okay, like what joke, would have the lead up to, the answer of the joke being hippopotamus. So I was trying to work backwards. But instead of a joke or a riddle, I just had the full first verse just fall out of my mouth. And I said, there was a hiccupotamus who hiccuped quite a lot of miss. And every time he got a miss, he'd fall upon his bottomus. And I thought, whoa, where did that come from? And I thought, like, that sounds like a children's book, like something. So I wrote it down in my sketchbook, and then didn't think about it again. Probably that would have been a year later when I had that class. And I thought, well, I have to pound out a children's book over the weekend. I kind of already have a start here. So I just, fleshed it out more. Okay, well, what happens next? What happens if a hippo has the hiccups? And, I came up with another 4 or 5, 6 verses, just folded paper, did the little dummy on it. And over the course of a weekend, and that was it, and turned it in, and, they liked it. I was the only one in the class who wasn't a teacher, a future teacher. So mine was a little bit more polished looking than everybody else's because I was an art student.
Do you still have that little paperback with pencil drawings?
Oh yeah. It's in a folder in the other room. And actually, when I do school visits, I don't bring the original along, but I made a photocopy of it, and I hold it up and show the kids where it got its start. And so that was it. And then, that's what happened to it, is it got tucked away in a folder. From there, I wrote other things. I had other story ideas, and I work on those. But I always felt like the Hiccopotamus had the best, chances going for it. It was the most fully formed, but I also knew it was far from being ready. So I'd pull it out and I'd do a little work on the rhyme, or I'd do some character design, changes, and then tuck it away, and then a few months later pull it back out. So I visited it off and on over the years. And then it was a long time, maybe 5 years later, let's say. I was working at a place that I didn't enjoy much, and there were some guys I knew that were going to start their own publishing company. And they knew of me, and they invited me to come on board as their first and ultimately only employee. And we were making sticker books and coloring books and mostly things of that nature. But they really wanted to get into the trade book side of things and do a picture book. And one of the guys had seen that little dummy that I had made. I'd shown it to him years earlier. So even before I came on, he said, and I've got it in the back of my mind, I'd love to see if we could, turn that into a real book, if we could publish that. And then about 3 years into this venture, they decided, okay, it's time to jump, on the trade book stuff, higher end, higher price point. And so they said, all right, Aaron, would you be willing to turn, that Hiccopotamus dummy manuscript into our first high-end trade picture book? And I said, absolutely. So while we were still doing coloring books and sticker books and those kinds of things during the day, in the evenings I would go home and then I would work on the art for the Hiccopotamus. And so I worked on that off and on. Maybe it was about 7 months because, again, I wasn't doing it. It wasn't the main part of my day. Got that done, got it published, and it did fantastic for this little tiny startup publisher, and they're the only book they had in their catalog. It went through 3 printings in its first 6 months. It was doing really well.
And this is what year was this?
This would have been 2005 is when it was published. So I was probably working on it during 2004. So 2005 it got published. And then, like I said, was doing really well, 3 printings at 6 months, and then the company went out of business. They folded. So there was some internal conflict amongst the 3 guys running the company, and so they disbanded. And so I was left with 2 things. I was left with, like the greatest portfolio piece in the world, a finished picture book that was selling really well. And then the second thing, it was unemployment. So I immediately had to scramble and try to figure like, oh man, like what am I going to do? And this was right when the economy had tanked. So, like it was hard to find work, and it was very sudden. So in fact, when the guy told me, like, yep, it's done, it's over, he said, and that check that you got 2 weeks ago, like that'll be your last one. Wow. So there was no kind of like, oh, get things in order. The funny thing is, though, like I could see it coming. Like I knew something was going on. I didn't think it was going to be that soon. So I was starting to send out some probes, thinking like I would like, this was a great experience making this book. I'd like to be able to do that maybe full time. So let me see if I could get an art rep. Maybe I can get some other projects going. So when this company does eventually crumble and go away, a year from now, maybe I'll have some other projects under my belt so that I can get something rolling. And actually the day that I put my portfolio samples in the mail and sent them off, it was the very next day that I got the phone call from that guy. So it was like, whoop, well, I saw that coming, but didn't see it soon enough. But anyway, so then I had those portfolios out, and I actually heard back from 2 art reps who were interested in taking me on. And so I decided to go with one of them. And at the same time, I was sending out resumes and looking for full-time work and just not finding anything because, again, it was like the economy had tanked. There was nothing out there. I was doing anything I could to make any kind of income. So I was like mowing lawns with this guy from our church. The employment I did have was I was opening boxes in the back room of a Christian bookstore. I was making about 1/3 of what we needed to live on. But then I started slowly getting some illustration projects coming in from this art rep. And it got to a point where I thought, you know what, like I can't do both. I can't sort of like scramble around trying to find employment and invest in, doing this freelance illustration. I have to pick one or the other. Like it's really scary, but I think I should head toward this illustration stuff. Because even though it wasn't enough to live on, it was about 2/3 of what we needed to live on versus the 1/3 opening boxes. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to pursue that. And that was about 15 years ago. And we've been living that way ever since, just like project by project, the right thing coming along right when we need it. And only, having enough income for about the next 2 or 3 months ahead. And then the next project comes along.
Was there ever a point where you thought about giving up and just getting a steady job?
Oh, absolutely. Like constantly. I still like today, yesterday. No, I think about that all the time. But especially when there comes a point where it looks like, okay, I know the work I've done. I know the income that's coming in and roughly about when it's supposed to come in, and like the numbers aren't adding up. So then it's like, okay, send out the resume, start looking online, pull up job openings. Yeah, I do that all the time just because it feels like that's the wise thing to do. I've never been one where I thought like, this is what I want to do and I'm going to hang on to it really hard and I'm going to make it work. I mean, from the story, you can tell like I didn't even pursue it. Like this would have been my dream job all along. I always would have loved to do art and illustration full time, but I'm not wired where I would jump out and try to make a go of that. It's just, I feel, the responsibility side of me is too strong. So it was, and I think the Lord knew that. And so the way he got me here was like, okay, I'm going to have the company you work for go out of business in the middle of a recession. So you can't find any other work, and then you'll be doing the thing that you love to do. So I really feel like that's how it worked. It wasn't really anything I pursued actively. Back to the Hiccopotamus started part of the story. About a year later, maybe after the company went out of business, I got an email from a guy, and he said, I am in the marketing department of a publisher called Marshall Cavendish, and we found your book, The Hiccopotamus, a little while ago. It's my daughter's favorite book, and our publishing company is coming out with board book versions of some of our best titles. And so I'm trying to get a hold of your publisher to see if they'd be willing to let us make a board book version of the Hiccopotamus, just because I love it so much. He's like, but I can't get a hold of them anywhere. I have no idea how to contact them. And I said, oh, well, that's because they don't exist anymore. But, I think I could grant you the rights to a board book version of the Hiccopotamus. And if you're interested, when the company went out of business, it was selling really well. It didn't have anything to do with why the company went out of business. And I think there was still demand for more. So if you'd like the rights to, the hardcover trade version of it, you could publish that too, reprint it. And so I got in contact with their editor and their publishing team, and they were like, we don't really want to do the hardcover version. It's already had its debut. It would just go straight to the backlist. It's not going to sell well. We really don't have any interest in that. We really just want the board book version. But in the end, they were like, why not? Okay, we'll do both. As long as we can have it, we'll do it. And so they published both. They did a board book version and a smaller size hardcover version of it. And it didn't do terrible, but it didn't do great. It was okay. I don't know that if it ever made back, the additional royalty or the additional advance that they gave me for picking it up. So it was just kind of sitting there. And then about 2 or 3 years after that, Amazon decides that they want to get in on not just the distribution side of the book world, but on the publishing side of the book world as well. So the easiest way to start a publishing company, if you're Amazon, is not start from scratch, but to go buy up a bunch of other already existing publishers. And so they looked around. The very first thing they did, and so they looked at all these different genres. So the very first thing they did was they said, okay, let's buy an audiobook publisher. So they bought this audiobook publisher called Brilliance Audio. And then the second thing was okay, let's buy a children's book publisher. So they bought Marshall Cavendish. And then they bought an inspirational publisher and a romance publisher, all these different kinds of things. So now the Hiccopotamus is owned by, this publishing wing of Amazon. And they renamed it Two Lions. They renamed Marshall Cavendish Two Lions. And then all of a sudden, now that Amazon's got a hold of it, the sales start flying. They start just skyrocketing.
Now they have an interest in promoting it.
Absolutely, yes. And so then the numbers just start going crazy. And then, and now it's got, I don't know how many thousands of reviews on Amazon. So it's kind of that machine that once the ball gets rolling, then it's sort of perpetual motion. Once it's got enough sales and reviews, then it gets suggested more. And if it gets suggested more, people buy it more and they review it more. So it's just, it's in the system and it works now.
Right. But if it wasn't a great book, that wouldn't happen. So it's.
I think it's got a cover that really clicks with people, because how much of the inside are you seeing when you're buying things on Amazon? And I've done other work for Two Lions that hasn't taken off like that. So I've got maybe about 4 different books that I published with Two Lions, and the Hiccopotamus is the one that just is like, for whatever reason, that particular title with that particular, outlet distribution point is just like this amazing match. And quite regularly it jumped, and I don't know how this happens. I don't think it's always in connection with a promotion, but every once in a while it'll jump up to like, the third highest selling book on Amazon. Not just children's books, but like every book on Amazon. It's like in the number 3 spot, like right after, like Twilight or, or whatever's the big thing at the time. Next John Green novel. And then the Hiccopotamus, and it'll stay there for like a couple days, and then it'll drop back down to, wherever it is in the.
I've been checking on it the last couple of weeks. It's been in about the 1,500 range.
All right.
Which for people who don't understand Amazon, to be in the top 2,000 books on Amazon is an incredible amount of sales.
Yeah. But from what started as just like when I made the book, it literally was like 4 guys in the corner of this old abandoned, dusty, nasty warehouse making coloring books in this one book, to now having this book, being actively promoted by the biggest publishing giant in the world. And again, like I had very little to do with that transition other than just watch it happen and have the right people really, really like it and take a shine to it, to the point now where there's a stuffed plush of the Hiccopotamus toy company made. It's pretty crazy. It's fun to watch how all that happened. Even the other interesting thing too, as part of this story, was like when they were looking around and buying up all these publishers. So Brilliance Audio, the very first publisher they bought, is actually in Grand Haven, Michigan, where I live. And so when they second bought up Marshall Cavendish didn't have their own distribution, but Brilliance Audio did. So they just took all of the stock of Marshall Cavendish's books and moved it over to the warehouse of Brilliance Audio. So when I need to get more copies of the Hiccopotamus, I call up this place that's like 4 minutes from my house. And the lady on the phone lives like 3 doors down from us. And she'll often be like, oh yeah, I'll pick some up and drop them off on your porch when I come home from work. So like, there's no reason that kind of like interconnectivity should have happened. Like there's nothing about the fact that I live here in Grand Haven, which is why the Hiccopotamus is there now. It's just, most things are in New York, publishers. So
yeah,
it's so bizarre, other than I see the hand of God all over that, just these things that seem like coincidences. And it's just like, nope, I'm taking care of you. I'm in charge, and we've got things going to provide for you. So.
Great. It sounds like you weren't being very ambitious about pushing this book. So God and the universe conspired to foist upon you bestsellerdom.
I guess so. Yeah. No, I've always, so, and like my faith's pretty significant part of my life and who I am. Like my one goal has always been just like, I want to be obedient and I want to follow you, Lord, wherever you're guiding and directing and leading. And I trust that you'll take care of me, that you're not necessarily going to, it's not a prosperity type thing where it's like, and then I'm going to be a millionaire, but it's just like, I believe, that the Lord knows our needs before we ask for them, and he'll provide and take care of things, if I'm trusting him and following him. And so that's always been top priority. And then I just trust that the provisions, will come as I'm trying to do, what he wants me to do, to take care of the family and to use the gifts that he's given me and to do everything I work at with excellence, and, interact with the people around me in ways full of integrity. And then I think he's blessed that. So, I mean, there's even been a point. So when that company went out of business, the original publisher, and I was trying to get the rights back to the Hiccopotamus because there was also like a scholastic version of it. And so I was just like, I would rather have the royalties from that come to me rather than being filtered through this guy, whose company didn't exist but still had the rights to it. And that was like a long drawn out process. And part of it was because I think the guy was trying to hide some of what was going on behind the scenes. And when I finally got things turned over to me and saw the numbers, I found out that he had just pocketed like tens of thousands of dollars of royalties that the book was making.
Yikes.
That I did not know about. And which was part of the reason why the company went out of business, and like the other partners were suing him, and it was a mess. And they asked me, like, you want in on this? Do you want in on this lawsuit? And I was kind of like, you know what? It stinks that he did that, especially because we had been unemployed for like months and months and months, and like didn't know where we were going to get groceries from. And to find out that there was, you know, like tens of thousands of dollars that could have come to us in that time, like it was hard not to be really angry at this guy. But I thought, you know what, like the Lord had that happen for a reason, and I don't really feel good about lawsuits and those kinds of things. Like I would rather just let it go. God could have turned that over to us. He didn't. There's nothing wrong if I wanted to pursue it now, but I just don't really feel like that's the right thing to do. I want to focus on moving forward. I've got the rights back to it. You know, stuff will trickle in from Scholastic. Like, it's okay. God, I will let God take care of, you know, the injustice or the justice in this situation. And obviously there's no way for me to know, but I have kind of always felt like there was sort of like an honoring of that, you know, that surrender of just saying, Lord, I'm going to turn this over to you, rather than kind of like fight for what I should have had. Where now he's like, okay, yeah, and I'm going to bless that book. Here's now, you got the royalties coming to you, and we'll see what we can do with this thing. And I've made back on it way more than what that guy had stolen in the original, in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I can imagine the challenge of turning down that opportunity to be vindictive or even just seek justice to get what was rightfully yours.
Right, yeah. But you know, it's more like I'm more people-minded, and I'm like, you know, this guy's messed up. At the time, I was like, I don't know how much more interaction I'm going to have with him. I want him to see the error of his ways and become a better person. And is he going to do that if I sue him, or if I maintain at least, you know, good speaking relationship with him, interactions? And we didn't end up having any more interactions in life, but at the time it was like, I want to keep that possibility open. And that was the thing that was most important to me at the time, was, you know, man, this guy's heart is clearly in a messed up place. Like, can I speak into that? I don't know, but I'll leave the door open for that.
One thing you've done through all the ups and downs and financial struggles, you've kept producing so much. You do so much drawing and writing. I know for me, when I've gone through a challenging time, usually that is the first thing to go.
Yeah.
It's hard to be creative. So how did you manage to keep your creativity and art flowing during those times?
Necessity, because I like to eat and I like to see my children eating. I really, it's hard for me to, again, like that responsibility piece is so strong in my mind. It's hard for me to be like, oh, I really want to draw today, or I want to make a book that I would really enjoy. The things that drive me are more, you know, like, oh, we've got bills coming up, so I will say yes to this project, or I will pitch this kind of an idea to this publisher, rather than let me sit down and make something that like would really speak to my heart or my soul. I would like to do those kinds of things, but it's just more like I always feel like I'm scrambling, kind of feel like I'm hanging on the edge of a cliff with my fingertips, and it's like, oh, I got to hit this deadline, and as soon as I'm done, then it's like, well, what's that next thing? There really hasn't been a giant chunk of time to sit back and be just like, let me invest in creative pursuits. So that's one element of it. And then when I have had time to invest in creative pursuits, for good or bad, I tend to, you know, again, like I have my family in mind. So it's sort of like, hey, the big energy, the things I devote energy to the most in creative pursuits are things where it's like, let me do this with the kids. So like for 7 years, we had this book review blog where we posted book reviews every week. And that took like a good, 10, 12 hours minimum of my time each week. to like pull all that together. But we did that for 7 years because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed children's books. I liked my kids. I wanted to kind of like help, that was my way I saw of contributing to their homeschool education. And it was a lot of fun. But like, did that bring us any income? Probably not. We launched into this giant art project in Grand Rapids, Michigan, about 45 minutes from our house. They have the world's largest art prize competition on a yearly basis, where they see like thousands of entries from people all over the world. They give away like $500,000 every year. And we had gone to that every year they had it, 7 years running. And then the 8th year, I had this idea for a project for our family to do together. So like we spent a year working on this art project and entering art prize together. And, we didn't win any income from that, but it's like, those are the kinds of things that I end up investing in.
Got a lot of attention. I had forgotten about the whole art prize thing.
Yeah.
Till you mention it. But was that the painting faces on rocks and leaving them all over town?
It was, yeah. So that was something that we had done just as a family project. Maybe 2011 is when we did that. We had watched, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a documentary called Exit Through the Gift Shop about Banksy, the street artist over in England. And so, we're an artistic family and it looked interesting. So we watched that together. And it was great. And then Gracie, my second oldest, my daughter, after we got done, she was like, that is what I want to do with my life. I'm going to be a street artist. And she was like, so excited and so passionate. And she's like, Dad, how do I get some spray paint? And I was like, oh, what have I done? And, but I was happy that she was so, charged up creatively. Like she was so excited about this. And I didn't want to like squelch that enthusiasm. So, but I was like, but I don't want to go running around vandalizing things, obviously. So I was trying to brainstorm and it's like, okay, what's a compromise? What would still tick all the boxes of what she's excited about? Something public, something kind of secret and stealthy, something that's, big and public and artsy. And so what I did is I got a bunch of rocks and painted them different colors and then brought them in, and the kids and I painted faces on them. And then we went around town and we hid them in different places around town, like corners of windows and up in the branches of trees, and left them there, took pictures of them so we wouldn't forget about it, and posted them to a blog that we kept where I shared art stuff that my kids made. And then, and that was supposed to be the end of it. It was like, well, that was fun. That was a fun little outing excursion, fun experience. But then the blog post like exploded. It went viral. I don't know who it was that shared it in the right spot, but we had like hundreds of thousands of people visiting that blog post, hundreds of comments underneath it. We had a German children's magazine write about it. Ripley's Believe It or Not wrote about it in one of their publications. We started getting emails from people like all over the world saying like, I love this idea. I'm a toy store in New York and we're going to do this as a community activity.
Oh, wow.
And a lady that's like, I live in Australia and I'm going to get together with my friends in the park and we're going to do this next weekend. It really exploded and took off. One of the guys that wrote me was a guy that lived in Washington, in Renton, Washington. And he said, like, I love this idea. Is it okay if I do it with my kids? I'm not like stepping on any toes. And I was like, oh no. It's like, we don't lay claim to like owning this idea. Anybody can do it. And he's like, okay, great. I just want to check. And he said, one thing I want to do in addition though, is I want to start a Facebook page so that if people find the rocks, we'll put the address on the back of the rock of the Facebook page and they can upload photos and share them. And I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. Go for it. Like that's super. So I followed his page. He called it Renton Rocks because of the double R. And then he kept it up. He kept doing it over the next 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So about 5 or 6 years after that, as we were at Art Prize, looking around, people had always been asking me, like, are you ever going to enter Art Prize? You're artsy. And I was like, I don't have a good idea for Art Prize, because Art Prize, it's like got to be some like a giant massive painting or some huge sculpture. It's got to be something weird or unusual that you haven't seen before. It's not like just like a really nice little painting is ever going to win Art Prize. And so I was thinking back, I was like, well, the one viral thing that we've ever done as a family was that rock painting thing that we did about 5-6 years ago. I was like, would that work for art prize? We'd have to adapt it some way. And so that's when I went, after we got back home, I was like, hey, do you guys want to enter art prize next year? I think we could do the painted rocks. And so the way I adapted it to fit for art prize was, in the past, we just painted like 40 things and then hit them around town. I was like, this has to be massive. Like, we have to paint rocks for a year. So there are a lot. So we just set a goal to, like, how many rocks can we paint over the course of a year? It ended up being 1,000. So we painted 1,000 rocks. We painted them all in matching pairs. So 500 of them, we gathered all together in one spot, because you have to have a venue for art prize where people know to go look at it and vote for it. So we gathered half of them there. And then the other half we hid all over the city. So 500 rocks all over Grand Rapids. And then when people stopped by and looked at them, they're like, oh, this is cool. We said, but this is only half of the experience. Now that you've seen this, keep your eyes open as you travel around art prize, because there are 500 matching rocks hidden all over the city. So you can play the game however you want. You can see, like, who sees the first rock, who sees the most rocks, how many can you take pictures of? And it turned it into kind of like this big citywide scavenger hunt. So that year, I think there were like 1,400 entries in art prize. And we ended up coming in second place in our category. You don't get anything for second place. There's 4 categories, 4 prizes for each of the first places in the 4 categories. We came in third place that year.
What's the prize for first place?
It's like, I think it's like $12,500.
So that's painful that they don't have a second place prize.
Right, it is. But it got a lot of attention. And then the unintended benefit that I didn't see at the time was I connected with, like, so many teachers and principals and librarians, educators, that my school visits, which had kind of tapered off almost to zero in the previous years, just like surged. And I had like 30 school visits the next year from people I had made connections with at Art Prize, which is a huge, significant source of income for us.
And to explain what that is, that's where you go visit a classroom or a school and read your books and do activities with the kids.
Yep, try to get kids excited about reading and writing and creating, share the story about how I make books, and we do fun things together. And a lot of schools kind of have it in their budget to invite authors and illustrators to come in particular during the month of March, which is reading month. So yeah, so as March of the next year like rolled around, which was, I think Art Prize was in October. Like I wasn't anticipating, that kind of harvest from the investment in Art Prize. So much so that I was like, whoa, like we need to think about doing something next year just because like it's in our backyard. It would like be stupid not to enter, not with eyes on winning Art Prize, but just like making those connections. And so we scrambled for an idea for that following year. And so I've entered every year since then. So there were 2 more after that. So that first year we came in 3rd place. The second year we came in 2nd place. And then the 3rd year we came in 5th place. But that first year, the other little side tangent I was going to say was while I was there, I kept hearing sort of like these odd comments, from people after they never said it to me directly, but they look and they're like, oh, these guys are painting rocks. Well, we've been doing that in our town, for 6 months, or whatever. It was like that's not very original. And I was like, I'm like, what are they talking about? Like, I don't understand what this is. And so I went online and did some looking, and apparently that guy in Renton, Washington, who had been doing it for about 6 years, like that was just a thing. About 6 years after he started it began to spread. So it spread to other towns in Washington. So there was like a Seattle Rocks Facebook page, people that must have found his rocks and been like, that's cool, I'm going to do that in my town. And then it spread, after about 3 months, it spread to outside of the state. And then there was like about 250 other of these Facebook page with like a city named Rocks popped up in other states. And then it went global. So then it spread across the ocean to cities over in England doing it. And you could find like news reports on this, like on the Today Show and Martha Stewart magazine and newspapers over in England talking about this rock painting craze of like hiding rocks around towns and posting on Facebook. And the thing is, to the point where in 2017, when this was going on, there was like 2 million people that belonged to a Facebook page of some kind of this painting and hiding rocks. And if you trace the trail back, like how did all this start? You can go to that guy's page in Renton, Washington, and right there on his page, he says, we got this idea from these kids in Michigan. There's a Grand Haven Rocks Facebook page. So they do it in our town, and they have no idea that this is where it started.
Wow. In
2011. It just like circled the whole globe and then came back here.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so that was an interesting, on two fronts. It gave us an idea for Art Prize, and then also turned into this like global phenomenon of people painting and hiding rocks as like fun little community activity.
And then you got accused of plagiarizing what you had come up with.
Yeah, nobody's plagiarized. Oh yeah. At Art Prize, they were like, "This isn't a very original idea," which was funny because that had happened in the year between. So none of that had taken off at Art Prize 7 when I was like brainstorming, trying to say like, like what could we do for Art Prize? And I'm like, well, painting rocks is unique. Nobody does that. Nobody's seen that before. It was like about 3 or 4 months after that was when, nationally, internationally, it started spreading. And so then as we were at home painting our 1,000 rocks, it just happened to be popping up all over the world and other places too. To the point where we did it, it didn't seem original anymore.
So the painting rocks and entering the Art Prize competition, that brought you this unexpected benefit of more school visits and contacts with teachers and such. And a while back, you mentioned briefly your blog that you had with your kids.
Yeah.
And that also brought you into contact with a lot of major children's book authors. I think the blog was a bigger success than what you let on when you mentioned it before. So
yeah,
could you go in a little more into Bookie Woogie?
Yeah, so Bookie Woogie, that was the name of the blog. Again, I'm not very smart, so it had the potential to lead into other success, but while I was doing it, like I really wanted to keep it pure. So it was like, this is something I'm doing for my kids. And it's neat, like we make a review and then other authors love it, and they write back and tell us how meaningful it is. So like there was that aspect of it I was really excited about. But I was like, I don't want to make this about me. I don't want people to know that I am a children's book author, illustrator. So almost the entire time I stayed anonymous on there. Like I only referred to myself as Z-Dad. I never had my name anywhere.
Oh, wow.
If somebody did some digging, they could figure out who I was, because every once in a while, like if I had a new book come out, we'd review my book and talk about it together as a family, talk about how I made it. But then that would just get folded into the archives, and then the next week a new thing would pop up. So you'd have to stumble across the ones that talked about my books. So it was good for me in the sense that like it really helped me understand the craft of writing and illustrating in a way where I had to like articulate it as I was talking with the kids, telling them about like, look at how this artist used this white space, or, this is called alliteration, what they're doing in the, things that I just took for granted or knew or kind of did instinctively. It was like, oh, well, why is that such a neat illustration? Let's talk about it. So a lot of that moved just from kind of like the back of my mind to the forefront of being mindful of what I did as an illustrator and as a writer. And it did, like, we made some legitimate friends in the picture book community over that time as well. Like we'd review a book, and I don't like, that was the constant refrain. Obviously they weren't seeing each other's messages to us, but like over and over again, we would have people say like, this is my favorite book review I have ever gotten in my entire life. And this is like, world renowned Caldecott and, Newbery winning illustrators and authors telling us that kind of stuff. So that was really cool. And maybe I didn't really explain too much about what it was. So it was, the premise behind the blog was, I'm going to record kids' reactions to kids' books. So rather than, children's publishing is one of the rare spots in the world where people that consume and write about the product aren't the targeted audience for the product. So like typically, like let's just say like a cookbook is going to be written by chefs for other chefs, reviewed by chefs. A children's book is created by adults, purchased by adults, and reviewed by adults, you know? And so my idea was like, well, let's read this with the kids. I'm going to turn on my little digital recorder. I'm going to record their honest reactions to the things we're reading and seeing, and then type it up and share it. And then we did fan art afterward, inspired by the book. And like that just really, it was unique. Like nobody else was doing that. And I don't think anybody else has done it since. So that hasn't spread around the globe to come back and accuse us of plagiarism. But yeah, it was a great experience, and creators loved seeing their stuff reviewed and dissected by kids. And the kids and I really grew closer together in that regard, and their creativity exploded. You know, they started making their own things, and you know, just because we're surrounding ourselves with the work of other creators and thinking about it, and that inspired them. So yeah, so some of those benefits were more less tangible. It's not like, oh, I made a bunch of book sales because I have this review blog that hundreds of people are visiting. I wasn't smart enough to be like, my name is Aaron Zenz. Like later on, I added that after I realized everything I was missing out on. And in fact, the kids were way more famous than I was or ever will be. Like if I had a book come out, the news I would see on blogs online was like, oh, he's the dad of the Bookie Woogie kids. They were so excited about. I never heard anybody say like, hey, those kids are the kids of that author. It was always the other way around. Like they were more excited that I was related to them.
That's great.
Yeah, and that got a lot of international attention too. There was a South Korean women's magazine even that wrote about us, did a story, and wanted us to send pictures. And I have no idea what the article ended up saying because I don't speak Korean, but got a copy of the magazine.
And the blog is still up and has all these testimonies from children's book authors talking about how great it was to have their book reviewed.
Yeah.
What made you stop, or when did you know it was time to stop the blog and move on to something else?
I regret it. I miss it. It was just like we got to the point, like it really was like I was putting in over 10 hours a week to craft and pull together the blog posts, and there was zero income from it. And it just was like I loved it. It was a joy, but there were just too many other life things that needed attention. And so the stuff that wasn't necessary in life had to make way for the things that I was getting paid for.
Right.
Actually, at the time, my hope was like I wanted to transition. I wanted to transition to like maybe a YouTube page where we reviewed books. So I really didn't think we were done. I just thought like I need to figure out a way where it's less labor intensive for me.
Yeah.
I was like, just turn on a camera and go. But it just didn't end up happening. Other life stuff got in the way, and it ended up kind of closing that chapter. But man, I miss it. I miss it a ton.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If it could be a YouTube channel, or you can make money off YouTube ads to monetize it.
Yep.
I know it's always a tough decision with that stuff because I always feel that ads have ruined the internet in a lot of ways.
Uh-huh.
And with this podcast, I'm not going to include any ads, but I also realize I'm lucky to be in a position where I don't have to try to make money off the podcast, where a lot of other podcasts, that might be their sole stream or mainstream of income. So I can't criticize them for including ads, but
right.
I'm definitely annoyed by the amount of ads we're inundated with online these days.
Yeah. We could try to go the Truman Show route here. Be like, hey, Sam, have you tried these new Windsor brushes? I love making my next picture book with Prismacolor color pencils.
I see you do tag them on your Instagram too.
And maybe they'll look at it and they'll repost it. But yeah, I'm terrible at social media. I don't know how to grow followings or and I don't have, like, I do not enjoy self-promotion. No. I would rather talk about other people's artwork and focus on how other, even with my own stuff, like the thing I'm most excited about is how other people are enjoying it. And I like it if I can kind of fade to the background, which is why I ran a book blog for 7 years about other people's books,
Right.
you know, and why our art prize thing was like, hey, we made this thing, but now you guys go play and have fun, run around the city and have family experiences, enjoying, like, trying to find these rocks we hid. You know, it was less about like, look at this thing that I have made, and more like, hey, we made this, but hey, now I'm handing it off. And you go paint rocks at home when you get back home with your kids. That was the part I was most excited about. And same thing with social media. It's like, I have no interest in just like writing about myself. You know, it's more like I feel obviously like, well, I have a new book coming out. I should probably put that on Twitter.
You've had a lot of great recent illustrations on Instagram. Is that the main place you post these days, or?
Yes, especially if you look at my website, where I think the picture that pops up when you go there is something that says new book for 2011.
I was going to tell you that. I looked at your website yesterday and you definitely need to update it.
I do. That's the first thing on my list of, like, when I have a chunk of time, when I'm not in that fingernails gripping the edge of the cliff, trying not to fall off as I try to meet all my deadlines. Like, if I have a moment of space, like, new website is #1 priority. But yeah, Instagram seems to be a pretty easy place to post things. And the majority of what you see there is the fruit of what we did for Art Prize the second and third year that we entered, which was actually, it was the first year we did Art Prize and we did the rock hunting activity. There were a couple schools in particular that just really got excited about it. A couple schools that I had visited the previous year that were in the area. And they said, hey, remember Mr. Zenz came in and visited and talked last year? He's going to be at Art Prize this year. And the schools just came out in droves of families from those schools just coming by and saying hi and playing the game and posting pictures. So much so that the next school year, I was like, hey, I know I was just at your school last year. I would love to come back and just talk about, like, how fun Art Prize was. Like, you don't even have to charge me to come back. Or if you want to pay me, you know, I won't charge you a full school visit rate because I was just there. You know, if you got something that you want to give me a little bit, like, that's fine. But more like, I just want to come and talk with you guys because that was cool what you did for me. It'd be fun to talk about. And I have a new book coming out, so we could talk about all of that together. So we went out, we talked about Art Prize. For the new book that I had coming out had monsters in it. It was called Monsters Go Night-Night. And all of the characters in that book were based off of monster drawings that my son Elijah had made when he was like 4 or 5 years old. And so, like, I show the kids that. I put it up on the screen. I say, like, you know, here's his original little, you know, scribbly monster drawing. And then I looked at that and got inspiration and I made this guy, you know, and that's where this character comes from. So, like, kids can inspire even grown-ups. And then at the end, I show them this activity where you, like, draw a scribble on a piece of paper and then you turn it into something, what you see hiding in it. And because we just got done talking about monsters, I, you know, drew some monsters out of those scribbles. And then a couple months later, I got this big package in the mail came back, and it was like 350 drawings that the kids at the school had made, where their librarian had made a little scribble and photocopied it. And then all the kids took that scribble and turned it into monsters and then wrote a thank you note off to the side. And it was just amazing. It was like the coolest little critters and creatures. Like, it was so exciting. I loved it. And I just couldn't fathom, like, the next thing I do is I just stick this in a drawer. You know, it was like, oh, like this, like, I want, like, these guys need to live somehow. And probably because of just the talk I had just given them, like, what I couldn't get out of my mind was, like, I want to take their little scribbly drawings and make fan art, you know, like, do my spin on that character. The same way somebody might make fan art of, you know, like a Marvel character, or, you know, Pokemon, whatever, just for fun. It was like, I want to make fan art of the things these kids are drawing because their drawings are so cool. I want to celebrate it in that way. But I didn't know how that would work. Like, obviously I can't do 350. I was like, do I make a picture and send it back to them and thank you for the pictures they sent me? Like, I just didn't know how that, like, I didn't know what that process was going to be. And then in the meantime, I had come to this conclusion of like, I need to enter Art Prize again because that really helped us out. And so somehow those two things came together. And I thought, you know what, that could be a neat Art Prize entry if I do, take kids' designs, kids design the monsters, and then I do fan art of, just reimagining, like, okay, in my style with the tools and techniques that I have as, a grown-up professional illustrator, applying that to their designs. And again, I'm like, but this has to be on a mass scale because it's for Art Prize. So I already had that stack of 350 pictures. So I reached out to a handful of other schools and just said like, hey, I have this idea. If anybody wants to, play along, give this to your students. And I had like about, I don't know, I'm going to say 3,000, 4,000 drawings come to my house of kids drawing monsters for then me to try to reimagine. So I started with that the next year. Art Prize put them up in the windows of this building where we were exhibiting the kids' design next to my finished piece of artwork. And then while I was at Art Prize, kids could create monsters and submit them. So over the summer, I worked on all the ones that the kids from schools had sent me, and then I cut that off as a source and then made ones from what got submitted at Art Prize. So every day at Art Prize, I would bring home a stack of about, I don't know, about 300 or 400 drawings that kids had made that day. I'd go through every one, I'd pull out 2 or 3 favorites, and then the next day at Art Prize, I would sit right there on the sidewalk with my colored pencils in front of the exhibit, and I would draw 2, 3 new monsters based on what got submitted the day before, and then add them to the collection. So it grew over the course of the 2.5 weeks. And then the next day, I'd look at the stack that came in that day, and then sit outside and draw. And so that was amazing and super exciting. And the cool thing was, again, like the way we were talking about how I'm wired, it was like the draw was, hey, let's go see this guy making art. But as people walked away, it was less about me, and it was more like, look at what these kids have made. And the kids are there drawing monsters and submitting them to hopefully get turned into something the next day. And then they would go home and they would keep drawing. So it's kind of like I start there with the spotlight on me, but then I could shift it and get like kids excited about making art. And then that year, the first year with the rocks came in 3rd place. That year with the monsters came in 2nd place. So then the 3rd year I was like, well, I got to come up with another idea because we got to keep doing this. And then I just couldn't come up with any new ideas. And finally, what struck me was the new idea was, why do I need a new idea? Like, let's do monsters again. It would be all different monsters. People were excited, the same way that if somebody makes a sculpture one year and they make a sculpture of a different figure the next year, like that's something new. So I made this batch of 150 monsters this year, make a batch of 150 different monsters the next year. So I did it the next year and ended up coming in 5th place that year. But it was neat because just the stories I would hear, there was one family in particular that came by and they were like, we are so glad that you're here again. We were hoping you would be here. Our son has something to show you. And they said, like you talked with him last year while you were sitting out there and he submitted a monster and it didn't get picked, so we were a little disappointed about that. But like you majorly inspired him and he has drawn monsters every single day for the past year. And he wanted to share them with you. And he had this giant folder, this binder full of just monster drawings. And it was so cool because they were like separated into different clans and like these kinds of monsters have these type of features and these kinds of monsters have these kind. It was so neat. And like if I hadn't shown up that 3rd year, that still would have happened. That story still would have played out. I just wouldn't have known about it. And it's just neat to like how many people just get that's how inspiration works. You look at what other people make and you kind of take it, you make it your own and process it and then put something new out into the world, and then somebody sees that and they do the same thing, and it's just sort of like a big volleyball game. We're just bouncing inspiration and creativity back and forth to each other. And I love the fact that I can do that for kids, that I can get kids excited and inspired about making things. I remember once there was a little kid that was over watching me draw while there was, like a gaggle of like 20 or 30 other kids over at the table drawing monsters and submitting them. And he was over standing next to me and I said, oh, did you make a monster yet? And he had this really weird look on his face, this weird expression. And he just kind of like hung his head and shook his head. And I was like, no, you could go do it. And he's like, no, I can't draw. And I was like, oh, well, you know what? That's the cool thing about monsters. That's why we're making monsters here, is because there is no wrong way to make a monster. Like, you can't mess it up. You could put anything down on that paper and it is a legitimate monster. Nobody can tell you you made it wrong, because monsters can look like anything. And his eyes lit up and he got all excited. He just raced over and just frantically started drawing. And like, it was cool. Like, that was like so cool to see. So yeah, so that's the most exciting thing about participating in Art Prize those 3 years, was just seeing other people get excited about creativity and making things, and for that, like, legitimizing like kids' art. Most of those drawings, like, if a parent found that at home, you'd just be like, oh, like, that's kind of a cool guy, and then you just chuck it as you're cleaning up, it goes in the trash. But here, like, the kids would draw these things and then they would go up in the window next to a professional artist's drawing, side by side, as hundreds of thousands of people came by to look at them. And like, the kids whose drawings did get picked, like, they'd come back and they'd have their aunts and their uncles and their grandparents with them and their neighbors, and they're all standing like, look, there's his picture. Like, it was so cool just to encourage kids to make stuff and be like, yeah, that has value.
Did the art prize happen last summer, or was it canceled due to the virus?
It was canceled. It got canceled. So they're going to do it again this next year, being hopeful that, they'll be able to do it by the time October comes around.
Yeah. Are you working on an idea?
I have 2 ideas. I haven't started working on them yet. I'm pretty busy with other income type work right now. So I don't know. Again, like, I can't think of small ideas. Like, these would be very labor intensive. Plus, the other thing that I just really, have to consider is, as much as I love inspiring kids and stuff like that, that isn't going to get me to put in the, 500 hours or whatever it is that I invest in an art prize entry every year. Because, like, the main motivator was like, whoa, school visits, that really helped our family out. Like, I need to think about that again. And like, school visits aren't happening right now, so even if I did enter art prize, I don't know how long it'll be before schools are interested in bringing strangers into their walls to go, expose their children to them. For every student, in the school is going to come in and see this stranger. Even if the virus stuff dies down, I think there has been sort of just like, I think, this mental shift of how we look at interaction that I don't know what school visits will look like once that'll start back up.
You've been doing some virtual school visits though, right?
I have, yeah, and those like, I just can't. Those are things people used to do for free. So everybody's re-looking at, like, how do things work now? It used to be like, like, oh, I'll go visit your school and here's my rate. It's hundreds or thousands of dollars depending on who the person is and what kind of fee they can command. But then they would say, like, oh, but if you want to do a virtual visit, like, I do X many of these for free every year, and they're this amount of, this many minutes. So just like, the value on that has been shifting, because now that everybody has to do virtual visits, it's like, well, we can't give those away for free anymore. But like, can we charge the same amount that we would charge if I was going in and doing a whole day in front of kids? So it's, it's all weird and messy right now. Everything's upside down. So yeah, I've done a handful of virtual visits. They're definitely not as fun. You don't get the same kind of connection and energy and interaction as when you're doing it live.
Well, hopefully things get back to a point in a year or so where the in-person visits can resume.
Yeah. And I mean, and if we knew that was going to happen and that teachers were like really excited about, like, we haven't done this for 2 years, like, let's go, then it would be perfect timing for me to go out at Art Prize and let people know, here I am and I live locally and this is what I do for a living. So yeah, I've got to weigh all those things to see if it makes sense.
Do you have some dream project that haunts you, or something that you feel like, oh, I really want to do this, but maybe the idea hasn't come together yet? Anything like that?
Um, I I would love to do an original series, like world building. Like I love the idea of world building. I have some books that I did where I thought it was going to be like the first volume in some larger scope thing, and that just didn't pan out. I would really love to sit down and craft some weird world with all its own rules. The thing that, like, man, my heartbeat comes from things from my childhood. I mean, they really have impacted me. So, like, I loved, and I still do, things like Fraggle Rock, where you're building this whole ecosystem, of how the different characters relate with each other, and then they have their own sort of like societies and cultures depending on if you're a Fraggle or a Gorg or a Doozer. Like, I love that. I love, like the Gummy Bears cartoon show, like things like that, where like that world building element. So
I don't even remember that show.
you know, High Adventure, that's beyond compare. They are the Gummy Bears.
That does ring a bell now that you say that.
Or even like the Dark Crystal, like those are the kinds of things that, like, man, just really got me excited creatively watching those kinds of things. So I'd like to do some sort of world building project like that. The other thing I would love to do is something that has to, I've had so many people tell me that I should do something with the painted rocks as far as a book, and I just haven't cracked that code yet. I don't know if it's painting rocks and taking photos of them and somehow crafting a story around that. I don't know if it's just like telling that story of what happened to our family, almost autobiographical, in a picture book with a combination of photos and drawings, or if it's just, a starting point for inspiration, and I write a fictional story about some kid that paints rocks and it goes global. I don't know, but I'd like to do something more with that.
It definitely seems ripe for exploration, as popular as that project became.
Yeah. So, and that's the kind of thing where it's like, something that has a taste of a viral element to it. It's sort of like, okay, there's something there, because it's hard to predict what will go viral. You could dream something up like, all right, what could I do that is just gonna, tap into everybody's interests, and you can't really predict what the next big thing is.
You talked about some of the serendipity that came about with boosting the Hiccopotamus and Amazon getting involved. But I think it really comes down to the silliness that appeals to kids. It's really written on a child's level, or it's something that they enjoy.
Yeah, well, I can speak to that. Like, that's definitely how I'm still wired. Like, my parents always joke that they can shop for my kids and for me at the same aisle. It's like, oh, here's the toys, or whatever. And if you were to look around, my studio, like, it's full of, like, there's Muppets over there, I got Fraggles over there, Toys of Monsters over here, and so like that's where my brain still exists, is kind of in that fantasy world of children's, the things that are appealing to kids, and even the media I consume. It's like, hey, you want to watch a movie tonight? And, like, when my wife and I are trying to figure out what to watch, and it's like I'm listing all these animated movies, and she's like, don't want to watch a cartoon. And I'm like, but that's just the medium. It's like, like I'd watch Adventure Time all day if I could. It's how I'm wired. It's what interests me, and it's what comes out is the fun, silly, nonsense kind of stuff. I don't have to work at that. It's just, when I started making up characters and stories as a kid, that's what I was surrounded with as far as television and books, and I never really graduated beyond that. So I'm still writing the same kinds of things that I was writing and loving when I was in 3rd and 4th grade. Like, it wasn't like, oh, that doesn't interest me anymore. Like, I still love the idea of anthropomorphic crayons, like I did when I was in 3rd grade. And I don't remember, like, when we were in college, like, I'm assuming I probably just had like lots of, did I have toys and things around, or like, I know I had like Disney
Yeah.
photograph posters and things like that up and around. But
Yeah, definitely a lot of toys, a lot of Disney and Muppets paraphernalia.
yeah, so it's continued, like that hasn't changed. And I guess I feel really lucky, really blessed that there's an outlet for that, like there's a way for me to continue to consume that kind of product, but then also to create that kind of product. And the fact that I create that product sort of justifies in my mind
Right.
the ability to keep consuming it. Like I feel like I don't have to grow up.
It's great. Well, it is a wonderful thing staying young at heart like that. And I always enjoy keeping up with your crazy projects, whether it's the painted rocks or the monsters. And I'm excited to see what you come up with next.
I am too. Yeah. Who knows?
Well, it's been great catching up. Thanks so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, it's my delight. My delight.
Thanks for listening to Living from the Soul. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review. This is an ad-free podcast supported by my books, which are available at samtarode.com. The theme music is by Gideon Tarode.